And then I am going to share the PowerPoint file. Don't look at my desktop because you'll get nauseous. Okay, so where is it? Is it this? No. There we go. Okay, so let's get on our slideshow view. Okay. Okay, so I've kind of had one person have a question, and here's what I observed. So when you're looking at this, what you're going to see is some of these are going to be negative and some of them are going to be positive. So what you're going to tend to see in all these homework and assignment problems is the negatives really come at the beginning. Usually when you're having a project that's something that you're going to get benefits from later, there's a large cash outflow in the beginning. So you're going to tend to see these negatives in the beginning, and then you're going to see positives later on. So what you're trying to do is get this figured out when these things are occurring. This is the biggest problem we have in this class. So this is usually what it looks like. And they don't, again, why are we doing this? Because it doesn't all occur in the same time period. We're investing money. An investment is something that you get returns from later. So you spend money now, you invest in buying resources now, you buy land now, you buy equipment now, you buy buildings now, in order to get a return from it.
So the doctor said, okay, to give, and come back for the reading on Thursday at 4:15. It's an appointment, so check in at the first floor.
Okay.
Okay, Keith, is that you? You have your mic on? Okay. So in project analysis, what you're really doing is trying to figure out what this stream of benefits is. And it may be negative or it may be positive.
Otherwise, you've never been tested positive.
No.
Okay. So what you're essentially doing.
Jellyfish yesterday.
Oh, no. It's painful. It's right. Did you see the doctor?
No, we go surfing.
Keith, could you mute your mic?
Is it a big, great deal of pain?
At the time, a little bit.
No. Okay. So what you're really doing when you're investing in a project.
It will go over here, so don't rush, don't stress. You may get a wrong reading. It may feel itchy, but that's not really.
Keith, could you mute your mic?
You may bleed a little, just gently there.
Okay.
All right, we'll see you on Thursday.
Okay, took care of it myself. Okay, so what you're really doing when you're investing in a project is you're giving up some current consumption of benefits today in order that you're going to get more in the future. So this area, the negative area, should be greater than or smaller than the positive area. So this is kind of what we're thinking. What are we giving up now in order to get more later? This is really what finance is all about. You're investing in things. That means you're giving up current consumption by giving up money, and you're going to get benefits later. And that's what we're trying to do in this class, is figuring out what that looks like. Okay, so let's talk about how we do this. So again, the initial year or today is always year zero. Why do we call it year zero? We call it year zero because it doesn't get discounted. The value of today's dollars is how much I spent. So if it's right now, then you can actually call that year zero, and it does not get discounted, essentially. Then 1 year from now is year one. So sometimes in these problems, you'll be trying to decide, did I get the money in 6 months? Did I get the money in a year? Did I get the money in 2 years? Did I get the money at the beginning of the year? Did I get the money at the end of the year? So sometimes when you're using Excel, it will ask you when you got the money, the beginning of the year or the end of the year. So that's why they're asking, because some of us may think year zero starts now and it lasts for a whole year. Then starts year one. So if you got something 6 months from now, you may think that's year 0. I may not. So I may want to discount it for 6 months just because I had to sit and wait 6 months. And I'm just going to tell you what, one of the problems we're having is when people don't have a lot of money, waiting is very, very hard. So this becomes a big deal when people have to wait for money. Every day you wait is another day that you have to worry about not having that money and giving up stuff. So that's kind of why we're so obsessed about counting these time periods. And then you really have to kind of link the costs and the benefits to the period in which you're going to get them. So that's really tricky when you're trying to read these problems. In real life, it's just as tricky, even way more trickier, because you really don't know. When you're a business, you get money every month. So in my business, I'm essentially doing this every month, not for a whole year, it's every month. Because sometimes waiting a year is a big problem for me when I first buy a property, because we all know I have a real estate firm, so waiting a year, it's expensive. So I'm very concerned when the benefits and costs occur. So now, how do we actually do this? So let's get started on a problem, because that's what we're going to have. So we have these two projects, Project A and Project B. So we have year 0. Each one costs $100. And here's the stream of benefits, 50, 40, and 30, 30, 45, and 50. And you notice that this one returns more in the early years and this one returns more in the later years. And it's very common that we won't have the same exact numbers for each of these projects. That will cause us issues later. But let's just try a simple discounting. So which project are we going to pick? Excuse me. Again, we can't just add these up. So we've got to get them all. Phone rings. Okay, we've got to get them all in the same time period. So if we were going to use NPV and it was positive, we would accept the project. And if it was negative, we would reject. That's how we would make a decision on which one we wanted to do. So if the NPV of B was greater than the NPV of A, then you would choose B. Okay? Will it always be that way? Well, it kind of depends. So let's just look at how we figured them out. So here's the NPV of A. So here's the $100. Here's the first year discounted by 1 year. So this is $50 divided by 1 plus 0.1 raised to the 1 power. If this was in Excel, Excel would be doing all this for you. Excel would discount this, would discount this, would discount this, add them up. That's what Excel calls an NPV, and then you would have to manually go add this $100 in yourself. So what does this tell us? The net present value of A is $1.03. What does that actually mean? That means that you have a 10% cost of waiting, and this investment returns slightly more than 10%. If it returned just 10%, then the NPV would be 0. If you made just 10% on this thing after you did the discounting, this would be an NPV of 0. That's why I know you're just making just barely over 10%. That's what that means. How about B? So B, and remember B returned more in later years. So B earns even more than A. It earns $1.99. So we're making just over 10% again. So are we happy with this investment? Yes, I made what I wanted to make. I made 10%. In my business, if I make 17%, I'm done. Stop talking about it. If I have an NPV that's positive, when I use a 17% discount rate, that means I've made more than 17%, but that's not what I care about. What I care about is that I made what I want to make. If I make more than I want to, fine, but that's not really what I'm focused on. What I'm focused on is deciding, is it a good investment? it's a good investment if you pay yourself the return that you want. And if the return you want is 10%, you've met it, it worked, we're done. So that's really the decision rule. It's nice to make more than 10%, but most people will have the minimum that they want to make. And if I make it, I'm happy, I'm not greedy, I move on. So if I was going to pick between these two, which one would I pick? I would probably pick B because it gave me slightly more money. So as the discount rate increases, the net present value will decrease, because as that discount rate gets higher and higher, the cost of waiting is higher. So the stuff that you have to wait for becomes less and less valuable today. And as the discount rate, oh, that's supposed to be down. As it goes down, then as it continues to go up, it will eventually come zero. And when it becomes zero, that's called the internal rate of return. Right? So sometimes NPV is already negative before you start. So you're just not making any good rate of return on that thing at all. Sometimes it isn't. So when is it making a good rate of return and when is it not? That's called the internal rate of return. You're lucky because Excel will calculate this for you automatically. So as the discount rate increases, the discount factor decreases. So anyway, that's from the table. So if you're using a table, so if it's 10%, you're dividing that number by a bigger number that's closer to 1 than if it's 15%. So you can see as the interest rate goes up, the NPV goes down. So that's why you can sometimes get confused. So it kind of looks like this. So as the discount rate increases, the NPV goes down, it becomes 0, and then it will become negative as that discount rate gets bigger and bigger. And the IRR is the discount rate that kind of makes you break even. I don't know what I'm earning, but I can solve for the IRR. This is what I invest. This is the benefits I get. How much did I earn on this investment? You can actually solve for that. Frankly, most businesses do not do that. Most businesses have decision rules. I want to make 10% or I'm not going to do it. For me, I want to make 17%. It's a risky operation. I'm investing my own personal funds. If I blow it, it comes out of my pocket. So I really want to make that 17%. If I make more than that, I'm happy. I'm not greedy. I'm just happy, but I need to make 17% or I'm not going to touch it. So I rarely solve for IRR, but sometimes people want to solve for IRR. This thing is, I didn't check these things. They're coming in all things. So at any rate, IRR is kind of like your break-even return. That's what I made over the life of the investment. Okay, so if the IRR is greater than the cost of what you want to finance it, like if I'm using my own money, I need 17%. If I'm borrowing money, I need 10%. So if I can earn more than 17%, then I accept the project. Greater than or equal to 17%, I'm ready. If I'm making less than 17%, then I reject the project. So it comes down to some nice decision rules, which is very, very convenient in many ways. However, there is a bit of a problem with the IRR decision rule. Sometimes they give us different answers. If the IRR is less than R, then the NPV will be less than 0, right? So sometimes it will give you an opposite rate gain, like right here. So we've got these two different things where we're going to compare. So here we have a $1,000 investment in project A and a $500 in project B. And here's the cash streams. This gives us an IRR of 20%, and this one gives us an IRR of 25%. So technically, B is more attractive. Why is it more attractive on IRR? Because the way IRR is calculated. It's just all in the calculations. The NPV at 10%, we get a different ranking. So if we use IRR, we're here. Why does this IRR look so good? It's a very small initial investment, and it's quite a substantial sum. It's more than half that initial investment every year, where this one is a larger investment, but this periodic sum we get back, that net benefit we get back every year, is smaller than half of the 1,000. So that's why this one looks more attractive, okay? But why is this MPV make this one looks more attractive? Is because this is a smaller rate of return. So you're technically, when you do this calculation mathematically, then it looks like A is better by 50 bucks. So definitely I would go with A, because the MPV is a more conservative, because what it's telling you is that everything you do is invested at 10%. When you're using IRR, what you're saying is this $475 is technically supposed to be invested at 20%, and this is supposed to be invested for 20%. So when I get this money, it goes immediately into something else that's returning 20%. This is where they're getting this IRR. And this is immediately going into something that's investing at 25%. But I'm telling you, my business, I invest at 17%. I don't invest at 20 or 25. I do it at 17. Everything I invest in has got to be at least 17. So this is more conservative because it's assuming every one of these cash flows are reinvested at 10%, which is clearly going to be true because I don't invest unless I get 10%.
Is 10% a kind of baseline value, or is that just there kind of for the sake of the example?
It's there for the sake of the example, but let me just say something on that issue. I said it last time, but let's repeat it because I think it bears repeating. If you invest in the stock market under a long-term strategy of 20 to 30 years in an index fund, you're expecting between 10 and 12% return. So that's if you're investing in other people's company, I would caution most people not to expect more than about 10% over a 20-year period per year, because that's pretty much how this market grows. Any given day you may not have that, but if you leave it in there for 20 years, it used to be 12%, but we've had a lot of problems in 2008. We have a lot of volatility now. Every time the president says something out of the side of his mouth, the markets crash. So we get a lot of up and down. We didn't used to have those unstable markets like that. We used to have a lot stabler markets. And we also have a problem with too much information. We have people reacting to heaven knows what around the world. In the past, we didn't have all this free flow of information. So people were more serious about what news they responded to. The good news on this is that we are redoing the international accounting standards. My son has been involved in several committees since about 2010, reviewing those international standards, and he's now rewriting code for the Securities Exchange Commission so that everybody can come into the stock market with consistent information, and they have programs that translate so that everybody's accounting is done the same way, because private markets are what we're dealing with in the stock market. So if you're investing in other people's company, I usually look at around 10.5, maybe 11. But if I'm investing in my own company, I want more than that because I'm suffering all the risk. I'm the one that's staying up at night. I'm working. I'm not getting paid to make these decisions. I'm worrying. I'm up at midnight doing cash flow statements, figuring out what my NPVs are. So I want to make more than I would make investing in other people's companies where I just sit around and count the statements as they come in. So that's why I would go 17%. I'm busy. I think my time is valuable. So, and I think my money is valuable, and I give up a lot to not spend my money on myself and my family, but actually put it in my business. That's a lot of sacrificing. So I think I deserve 17%. The most risky businesses around 25 to 30, if they're really risky, is about the highest I've seen. If someone gives you anything that's bigger than that, it's too good to be true. And I'm telling you that an average investor is going to be around 10, 11%. If someone tries to tell you it's better than that, they're lying.
Okay.
So I would not believe them. So that's kind of where I'm usually pulling out numbers like 10%. And let's talk about your Visa credit. How much does it cost you to borrow money from the company? 12? Has anybody got a 12 rate? I've got a 7% rate to borrow money.
Mhm.
Some of us may be paying 12, 8. What are you paying on student loans?
I think they're about 12 or no, 10.
Yeah, well,
10,
that's
12, I
pretty,
think.
okay. So I'm hoping that this education that you're spending this money on produces you a lot of something.
Right, because that's a lot.
It's a pretty healthy interest rate.
Yeah,
So that's kind of the problem, right?
yeah.
So, we have a lot of discussion in this class about what's the right rate. Most companies will have a rate. For those of you doing government project, the government publishes a rate. USAID likes to see people use around 8 to 10% because they like to see a more competitive project. The US government's rate for government projects is smaller. I think now it's pretty low, like 3% or 2%. So it's a pretty low rate. If we wanted to be sustainable, I love the 2% rate. But I don't know many businesses that would go off of that because they can't borrow money at that rate. You're not going to borrow money at 8% and invest it in a project you make 2% on. You're going to be losing 6% just paying the charges. So that's not going to work. So we got to start to really feel comfortable with these interest rates and what they actually mean. And for me, I've thought about my cost of waiting. I thought about the cost of my time. I thought about the cost of this business and the stress to me of doing it. And I decided on a 17% rate, and that's my rate. And that's what I use. And once I decide that rate, I don't vary off my rate. And so I can say without a doubt that I can go with NPVs because everything will be moving at that 17% rate because I don't invest in it if it doesn't get me 17%. But I'm not sure that I can tell you, I just bought a piece of land for next to almost nothing. So that will be a good investment because that initial spend was really, really low. So that one may come up with a nice IRR because the initial investment was very, very small. However,
Okay, so IRRs are better for small investments.
not better. What they're really telling you is what you're actually earning.
Okay.
So they might give you information you're interested in. I personally am not believe in that because this piece of property is going to be expensive further down the line. And I don't know how expensive. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to go with the conservative, which is the NPV. But some people like the IRR because it kind of is easy to calculate it and kind of gives you a rule of thumb of this is what I'm earning on this thing. But it is problematic because think about this. Governments and businesses and communities are looking at different projects. We have all these different things we can do, and they're all going to give us benefits. But what is the structure of those benefits, and how long do we have to wait, and what is our real cost of waiting? If you're starving, you have a very high cost of waiting. So dealing with having pretty trees in 30 years may not be something you're interested in, and I don't care what the IRR is. It's never going to work for me. So again, this really depends on the situation, and you have to remember what we're doing here. We're investing money to get benefits in the future. And what are those benefits and how do we value them? Waiting is expensive, particularly for poor people. If you cannot feed yourself today, you're talking to me about the environment in 30 years, not going to see it. So this is one of the problems that we kind of run into with even doing these calculations. A lot of people have a real hard time with projecting into the future because most of us can't think past Friday night. Like when you're getting a job and looking at college, are you sitting there thinking, oh, what kind of net present value am I going to get from investing the money in this education? Do you sit in classes and think, what is this going to earn me? Who thinks like that? Yeah, that's the problem with this, right? So it sounds good when I put it up there, but you have to kind of get back to real life and think, okay, so your average person is not going to be able to deal with all these numbers and all this waiting. But essentially, that's what we need to do when we look at projects, because if you're going to make good decisions about what's best for community, you really do need to understand how the benefits come back to you. And what I usually find, and if you read through all the resources and all those previous CBAs, big money projects never pay. Big money projects never pay. So everybody who wants to build big, expensive, this is why big, expensive highways, big, expensive fixed rails. Does it sound familiar? Should have gone with the cheaper project every day of the week.
Mm-hmm.
It's very hard when you got to wait a long time when it's a big, expensive project and it takes a lot of time to get the benefits out of it. It's really expensive to wait because money, that interest accrues very quickly on, you know, that cost of that investment. Secondly, then your projections get shaky. And you get rail cars that come in that were spec'd improperly, so then we have to redo them. Or, gee, we thought this was going to be easy to do, but it took us 4 times as long, so now the whole benefit curve gets shifted out.
Mm-hmm.
So this gets very dicey, because think, how are you able to forecast 4 years from now? Who knows what they're going to be doing 4 years from now and how much money they're going to be making?
Right.
Difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what we're facing with this. That's why it's very dicey. So let's say we're going to look at the different costs of capital for these projects, an example. So this is the previous one that we just went through. So we could get these to change if we change the cost of capital. We could get, let me see if I can go back. Okay, so here is 3.8. That's not the one we want. I'm trying to get you to the example so you know what numbers we use. I should have copied it in. Okay, so this is our project, I believe. Or maybe it's 3.7. Maybe I have a typo. So we had a 4%, and then we changed it. We had a, oh no, here's where we were. So we had a 10%, and we liked A. And if we had a 4%, then we would like A. And at 10%, we still liked A. Well, that didn't make sense. Okay, so here's another problem with the IRR. No solution. You don't have that problem anymore, but there is sometimes it's a hard formula to solve. Fortunately on you just use Excel, or you have multiple solutions. Why do you have multiple solutions? Because there might be more than one thing. It's an equation that the computer is solving for you, so you may come up with more than one answer. So I like MPV, that's what I use. But sometimes in your examples, it asks for IRR. IRR is the easiest one to do. You just highlight the whole row from year 0 to the last year. You hit IRR and it will tell you the answer. But you have to make sure that if you didn't get anything in 1 year, you have to put in a 0. Otherwise, it doesn't count that as a year, and that will affect your return. So you have to. Another problem we have that happens with MPV is, first one is capital rationing. What is that? Here's all these terms. Capital rationing. Well, basically what the problem is I only have so much money. So if I only had $500 and I had 6 projects, which ones would I do? Well, it would be fine if they would all be only $100 each. I could do 5 of them. But if I only have enough to do 2 and I got to pick out of 6, this is a problem. The other problem we have is if projects have different lives. If a project takes longer to return benefits, the MPV is going to be higher. So just because it's higher doesn't mean it's as good. It just took longer to get, it was more expensive, therefore it returned benefits for a longer time frame. So maybe you don't really want to directly compare those MPVs. So you might want to use some sort of, annually, what are you making over a 10-year period by dividing by 10. And here you may want to use a profitability ratio. So here's the MPV that I got, but I had to invest this much money. So you can actually say for each dollar I invested, how much did it return? So that's something that is very, very useful. And then we also have lumpy projects. All of these are the same thing. I've got more than one project. I've got to make a decision. And this becomes a problem when the economy is bad, because you go through and you take your best projects first, you chunk those out. Like right now, I'm not investing. The markets are hot, everything's overpriced, not touching it. Not touching it at all. I bought that one piece of land because it was a tax lien, but other than that, I'm not touching purchasing. Why? Because I've got all the stuff out of it. I don't see anything being attractive. My investing is very lumpy. I have to spend a lot of money to buy a house. It's very expensive. So they're very lumpy. Then they also then get different lives. If the house is in good shape, it has a different life than it isn't. So I get into those sorts of problems. So there is a lot of problems. Sometimes with lumpy projects, you can do combinations. It doesn't ever work for me because I can't split up houses. Sometimes you can do that. I don't know why this PowerPoint is coming like that. So one more kind of overview of cost of capital. So when you use the cash to fund a project, it can come from an investor, which means it's private or public funds, okay? When we're doing MPV, we don't care where it comes from. It's either a negative from the investor or a negative from the bank that you borrow from the bank and spend it. In either case, you're putting money into a project, okay? But you may use different figures when you compute the NPV. If you're using the owner's money, then I want more than you would pay Visa to borrow from them. If you're borrowing from Visa, you should pay them less than I would actually be paying myself, because I'm the owner. I should make more than the Visa company, because the Visa company doesn't stay up at night worrying about the project. All they do is give you the money, and if you don't come pay them back, they will repossess some of your stuff. So they have a much less risky position than the owner has. So the owner generally uses what we call equity capital, or the owner's money. And so they will generally use a higher cost of capital if they're using their money. If you're using borrowed funds, then you will be paying interest, and that interest will affect the benefit stream. It won't necessarily affect the return that you're getting on the investment per se. What it will affect is what benefits come back to the owner, because the owner is going to have to pay an extra amount of money, the interest, in order to make the deal happen. So the benefit stream will be reduced in that way. It won't be reduced in the actual interest rate. It will be reduced in the benefits, because you're going to have to take some of those profits and pay interest on the loan. So that will mean your benefit stream is smaller. And you may want to do that rather than risk all your own money, right? Because you want to pay the loan off with the proceeds of the project. So often you will see people, all these get-rich-quick seminars that you go to, it's all based on two theories. One is the magic of compounding, so save, 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 and it grows exponentially as you save more and put it in a high return investment. And secondly, using borrowed money to do your projects, particularly real estate investing. You borrow 80%, put down 20%, and all those profits accrue to you, and you only have to pay a little bit of interest compared to what you're earning. I'm earning 17%. I think my highest mortgage is 4%. So all that money that I borrowed, I'm earning 17 minus 4, 13% on that money. Because I'm only paying them 4, but I'm earning 17. So that is the magic of leveraging or borrowing. Another word for borrowing is leverage. I leveraged it. I borrowed the money. So we'll get more into that when you get into chapter 3. But we're not having to really account in the formula for the cost of debt via an interest rate. The person taking the risk is the person that borrows the money. They got to pay it back or something's going to get repossessed. So they will use their cost of capital, my 17%, but then I will have to pay some interest. So my benefits from owning that house will decrease. So my houses that are completely paid off whole much bigger benefit stream. Much, much bigger. Much, much bigger. So that's why it's attractive, but it takes me 15 years on a 15-year loan to see any real profits, actually. So that's kind of a problem. Whatever you use, you still have to have that cost of capital or that cost of waiting, the owner's opportunity cost of waiting, whatever you want to think of it as, you still have to use that same discount rate, whether you borrow the money or use the owner's money. It's just that debt capital is generally less expensive, but you still face risks. That's why you need to use the 17% and not the 4% cost of the mortgage. Is that clear? It'll be more clear when you get to chapter 3 because we're gearing up. Now, has anyone tried to do anything yet?
Not on Excel, no. I'm still getting it down.
Has anyone done any homework at all? And from what I'm seeing, no one's done much of anything. So we'll,
yes, I have, but I haven't submitted anything.
okay. How are you feeling about it, Keith?
Oh, just cruising along. Yeah. I
Okay.
kind of enjoyed the weekend a little too much, but
Okay. Well,
catch up this week.
when you have a question, email me right away so you're not sitting there frustrated. And then
Okay, thank you.
upload it and let me know if you need a video. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about operating costs. If you're a company and your operating costs, we generally don't include that unless it is a cost of financing. So it's really having to do with the cost of financing. So unless that project is something that's really, really a big deal, then we don't really worry too much about it. And then next time we'll talk about depreciation, which is a non-cash expense. So for private businesses like mine, figuring out some of these benefits, you have to do a little bit of thinking. So we're going to spend a little time on that. But depreciation doesn't affect cash flow because it's not cash. Remember, when we're doing MPVs, we're talking about cash flows. So if there's no cash, then the cash is not going to be changing. What's going to be changing when there's a change in the picture of the world will be the cost of waiting. If we're having a war, very expensive to wait. If we're having a crisis, very expensive to wait. So that's, or if, for example, I'm sick or someone's older, they don't like to wait. If they're young, they're more willing to wait. So these things change through time. And again, as we learned last time, when you go out in the real world, do you really see a discount rate? It's never labeled that. It's always called an interest rate, and everyone sees different rates. I think I bought something a couple years ago unexpectedly and got a really good rate. And this person I was talking to was like, wow, how did you get such a good rate? It's like it takes a lot of energy to get a very good rate. So that's something that only I could get. She could never get this rate. So, you know, what rate you actually use kind of varies, but in most cases in this class, we'll give you the rate. So it makes it a lot easier. So that's okay. But for the government project rate, there is a published government project rate. So that's possible to use that. So it does get a little complicated with depreciation. So that will be in chapter 3. So we'll kind of, I'm just warning you, don't get too carried away on the private business end of it, because that makes it a little bit different. And if you're working with a private business trying to do a public-private partnership, you do have to worry about the implications for the business. So sometimes you have to think about this, and we'll practice that. And I think we're kind of done. All right. Anything else? Anyone has questions?
I will soon.
Okay, so email.
Wait, I have a question while we're here.
Okay.
I think it was the end of chapter 2, and it was just the simple review questions, and I think it like number 1 asked for the cost benefit ratio, and then the next question asked for the net cost benefit ratio. What did they mean by the net cost benefit ratio?
Okay, so you have total costs and total benefits, right?
Correct.
So if you subtract total benefits from total costs, then you would have the net benefit.
Oh, okay. Simple.
right? So if you take the net benefit and divide it by total cost, you have the net benefit cost.
It's so obvious now that you say it that way. Thank you.
I know it seems real obvious, but sometimes it isn't if you're not familiar. So when it's a net, that means you've subtracted the benefits from the cost. And if it's a total, then it's a total. And let me just say, everybody talks about this stuff differently. A lot of people, because this is kind of difficult to get at first, a lot of people won't talk about discounting. And they won't be thinking about the opportunity cost of waiting. Because back in the day, like my father, they didn't like to ever borrow money. And then we became very into borrowing money, and now we're super into it, and maybe we shouldn't be so into it, because this is preventing us from being more sustainable, because it allows us to do a lot of spending now, and we don't stop to think about, well, what's the benefits am I getting from this spending? So these kind of terms, it's good to start thinking about them, because it helps you start to put this in context, because to be honest with you, a lot of us have emotional issues about money. For example, let's say you got $100 from grandma for your birthday. Would you spend it any differently than $100 that you just got from in your paycheck?
Yes.
Who would spend it differently?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would. Yeah.
Okay, it's $100 is $100, folks. That's an emotional thing.
Right.
We got a tax return, we blow it on something. I'm like, no, $100 is $100. We should see it all the same, because it's simply money. It doesn't really matter, but for some reason, people will spend it differently.
I like the cash back from Costco, and then they expect you to spend it right back at Costco.
And then you go there and spend it, right? It's the only.
I'm like, that's a 1-year loan with no interest.
Yeah, and then or if you're like me, you're sitting there, oh, I'm going to buy this one thing, right? Oh, I can buy that now because I've got my refund check.
Right.
So somehow
exactly.
it didn't matter that it cost $100 or whatever, and the ridiculous thing. But see, this is what we do. This is kind of a game that we play with ourselves. And this is what it leads to irrational things. Like, do we have any shopaholics in the group?
Absolutely not.
I mean, but this is what they're thinking, right? If I buy this, I'm going to be happy. But they're never happy, right? They're actually making themselves more miserable, because then they're more in debt. And then their houses are full of stuff. And we all know stuff doesn't make us happy. And we do the same thing around a lot of things, right? Like, oh, because this was more expensive, it must be better. Where do we get this? Who buys a steak and goes to the steak aisle and picks out if it's more expensive, it must be a better steak? People do these things. It's kind of silly. The Costco versus the Macy's strategy, although Macy's discounting a lot, or the Saks Fifth Avenue versus the Costco. You could buy the same thing in either store, but how do we make these decisions? I mean, we do some irrational things. So what this technique does is it really helps you prevent yourself from doing these irrational things. So that's what we're trying to kind of think about. Like even my toothpaste example. Do we need to buy toothpaste? I mean, my grandmother used to use baking soda to brush her teeth. And once a month, you know what she used to do? Brush her teeth with Clorox.
Oh, God.
Well, you could say that, but that's what she used to do. And so she never used toothpaste, and all her life, this is what she did. I was like, oh my gosh, is that even doable? And or you're going to use a water pick. And then you don't even have to buy that old toothpaste that goes into the water supply. Just use water picks. Who uses mouthwash? Do we need to use mouthwash? Could we get a mouth freshening tooth? So this can get quite involved as you really think about some of these things that we do and decisions that we make. So that's why we're trying to kind of deal with two kind of issues here. One is kind of the content of how we do this, and then there's the process of actually doing the discounting and figuring out all the benefits and costs. So that's why it's seeming very confusing. a lot of new words associated with the content and the new process of all this math, which is very scary. Right?
Yeah.
It's kind of scary because raising something to a power and then trying to move it through time, and so kind of scary. So keep trying, and then we're going to try again tomorrow, and I'll bring up some Excel files. I try on the second day to bring up more concrete examples so that you can actually see me working on these spreadsheets. Because the spreadsheets, it's a little tricky sometimes.
Beautiful.
Are we good?
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, bye everybody.
Bye. See you tomorrow.